Average inflation by spending category. This is critical, and very, very few people are going to know this, and you will because you're here. Expenses, my friends, expenses drives everything. Everything. If you don't have your expenses corrected or at least understood, how can you possibly have a plan for retirement? How could you possibly plan? In fact, we talked with Joe Kuhn last night in the live stream. We talked about that. Expenses drives everything. Know your expenses and know you can retire. All right, so we're going to look at this JP Morgan Guide to Retirement. I don't like JP Morgan. I don't like any of these guys, but I do like this chart, man. But I could do better. They can give me they probably spent $10 million to give this. Give me $1 million, I can get this done better. I mean, just look at my book, JP Morgan, right here. It didn't cost $1 million to write. Is better than your freaking thing. I'll tell you that right now. Anyway, so here we go. Average annual spending by age and category, 2017 to 2021. So we're looking at averages, not median. All right. And remember, when it's average, the outliers, the averages get skewed towards the outliers. Always remember that if it's an average, the averages get skewed towards the outliers. What does that mean? That means I have Bill Gates with his ill-gotten money. He's got $100 billion of assets. I have $1 to my name. Our average asset base is $50 billion. All right? The averages skew towards the outlier. If I spend nothing on long-term care costs and Grandma Jones spends $1 million on long-term care costs, the average long-term care cost spending is $500,000, well above the median. The averages get skewed towards the outliers. I just want to point that out. The outliers are a significant difference than the typical person would have, if that makes sense. You always want to look at the median, not the averages. But this is what we're going to use because this is what JP Morgan is reporting, the averages. All right, so the average annual spending, this is important. If you're young, 35 to 44, and if you're old, 75 plus. Here's housing. Again, by far and away, the biggest expenditure item is housing, by far and away. Nothing comes close. I'm pausing. I want to we're going to come back to this because it's so freaking stupid. But anyway, it doesn't matter. So if you're a young whippersnapper, 41% of your budget goes to housing. If you're an old, silent generation guy, 40%. So that's pretty level. About 40% of your spending, according to JP Morgan's average, goes to housing. Now, if you're young, only 7% of your spending goes to healthcare. If you're old, more than double that goes to healthcare. And notice that. Isn't that weird? Healthcare is the bulk of our spending. No, it's just not. Food and beverages, roughly about the same, 15%. That makes sense to me. You're going to have to eat. Everyone's got to eat. Transportation, big drop off as you age. Basically, 20% of your money goes to transportation costs. When you're young, whippersnapper. When you're old, fogey, it's only 12%. The odd thing is charity giving goes up. Well, that's weird because I thought we're all running out of money. But again, this is average, so the average skews towards the outlier. So a couple of people spend a lot of money on charities. That's going to make the average skewed that way. All right. But anyway, I like this one right here, housing. I like how they show that healthcare goes up as you age, but also transportation goes down. But here's the average inflation by spending category. And this is where it gets critical because all these people are like, oh my goodness, inflation, we're going to run out of money. Look, I'm not saying there's no inflation. Never said that. I'm saying is your spending is not being reflected correctly in your overall retirement planning. I'm just telling you it isn't, man. It's freaking nuts. So here's our housing cost. Typically, housing inflation, typically from 1982 to 2022, the average inflation for housing was 3%. In 2022, though, went up to 8%. So the cost of housing, of which we spend 40% of our expenditure, increased by 8%. You hear me? So again, I just want to point this out. If you spend $100,000, $40,000 of that goes to housing. And the increase in cost of housing went up by 8%. All right, so 8% on 40,000. What is that? $3,200 or something like that. Yeah. So let me just get my calculator. 40,000 times 8% should be $3,200. 3,200. So what used to cost $40,000 in expenditures now costs $43,200 because the housing costs went up by 8%. Interesting. That's interesting. And if you buy that, I got some oceanfront property in Arizona, and I'll share it with you why here in just a second. All right, so healthcare, you see the healthcare costs actually only went up by 4% in 2022. Look at that. So if you're an old fogey, 16% of your budget went to healthcare. It only went up by 4%, which is lower than what it did in 2000, the previous 40 years. Interesting. Food went up by 10%. I don't deny that. So you're spending a lot of money. That's your third biggest expenditure if you're an old fogey. And by far and away, the biggest inflation was in food. Wonder why? Oh, maybe because they're banning fertilizer in Europe. I'm just throwing it out there. Maybe energy costs are going through the roof and it's making it hard to transport food. Just throwing it out there. Transportation costs went up by 3.7% in 2022. Even though your spending went down, your inflation went up still high. All right, so their overall inflation is 6.4. So I want to show you something. How we figure this out is we say, okay, we take our housing cost, and our housing is 40. Right there. There we go. 40% of our housing, 40% of our expenditures go to housing. Housing went up by 8%, which means we times 0.4 by 0.08. That means our personal inflation rate for housing went up by 3.2%. All right. So if housing was 40% of our expenditures, and that expenditure housing went up by 8%, well, we take 0.4 times the freaking inflation amount, which is 0.08, and our personal inflation relative to housing went up by 3.2 when you factor all your spending. All right. Same thing with healthcare. 16% of our budget goes to healthcare. It increased by 4% last year. That times 0.16 by 0.04, that's a 0.006 inflation rate. All right. Food, 13% of our budget was to food. It went up by 10%. 0.13 times 0.10, 0.013. So our personal inflation rate for food went up by 1.3%. I hope that makes sense. I hope you get where I'm going with here. Because at the end of the day, it's just what is the inflation relative to the things we're spending our money on. That's what matters. And again, if housing went up by 8% and the bulk of our expenditures went to housing, we're going to get a big hit inflation. But then you say, well, how did housing go up by 8%? That's weird. Transportation, 12% of our budget went to transportation. It went up by 3.7%. You can see right here, 0.004. All right, so that's not even a 1 full percentage point. So healthcare costs went up by 0.6% for our personal inflation. Transportation went by 0.4%. The big one is housing and food. So you add all these things, 3.2%, 0.6%, 1.3%, 0.4%. We get roughly a 5.5% increase in our personal inflation rate. That assumes, though, that 40% of our expenditures go to housing. So we're going to show you here. Here's our annual average household spending by age. Housing, right here, is a big dark gray one. And you can see, again, 40%. Oh, it includes mortgages. Well, that's weird. Because what if you don't have a mortgage? And we're going to look at my book, which you should buy. Absolutely buy it right now. Stop this video and right now. I'll put a link in the show notes. Stop it. Go buy this right now. The very second. We're going to see on page 21, the very first chapter, home ownership. Percent of homeowners, 82%, the ages of 65 and 74 own their home. Percent of homeowners with no mortgage, 52% had no mortgage. And then over 75, 80% of people over 75 own their own home, of which 66% of those people had no mortgage. So we go back to this guy right here. We say 0.8 times 0.66, 0.8 times 0.66. We take our trusty calculator. 0.8 times 0.66 equals 53% of people 75 and older had no mortgage. So tell me then, if you have no mortgage, how does 40% of your expenditures go into housing? Well, real estate taxes. Okay, I get you. Real estate taxes. Okay, your real estate taxes, let's just say 1%. 1% of the value of your home. And we'll say you got a $500,000 home. All right, so your real estate taxes you're spending 5%. Hold on. You got a $500,000 home. You got a 1% real estate tax. That's $5,000. All right. Let's say your expenditures are $75,000. So you got 1% real estate tax, $500,000 home times 1% equals 5,000 schmackaroonies. All right. 5,000 schmackaroonies. That's our real estate tax. That's how much we spend on real estate. All right. So now let's say we spend $75,000 a year in income. So we got 75,000 is our spending. 5,000 goes to real estate. All right. So what do? We take our trusty calculator. 5 divided by 75. That is a 6.6% increase. So basically for our real estate, 6.6% of our expenditures goes to real estate. Does that make sense? 5,000 is our real estate taxes. Our expenditures are 75,000. You take those numbers. That's 6.66% is going to real estate taxes of our expenditures. 6.66% is going to of our expenditures going to real estate. 6.66%. Oh my goodness, the 3 sixes, dude. It's just numbers, man. Numbers. Don't get in this numerology stuff. All right, so 6.66% of our expenditures goes to real estate tax. All right, so now let's just say they increased the real estate tax 25%. All right, so it went from $5,000 to, it went to 6,250. All right, so 5,000, 6,250, that's a 25% increase in real estate tax. Does that make sense? Our real estate taxes went up by 25%. All right. What's our personal inflation rate on that increase in real estate tax? 0.0165. That's 1.65%. 1.65%. So while your real estate taxes went up by 25%, the actual cost to your budget was only increased by 1.65%. A whole lot different than saying it went up by 25% now, isn't it? Yes, because if you actually look at how much you actually spend on real estate taxes relative to the increase, you recognize that, yes, it went up. It went up a lot, 25%. It's no joke. But when it comes to your personal total expenditures, it's only 1.65%, dude, or whatever it was. 1.65. So where does the other expenditures go in the housing thing that JP Morgan talks about? Well, again, it includes mortgage. And I just showed you over half of the people who are 75 and older have no mortgage. So the housing costs inherently aren't going to be 40% of the freaking expenditures. Unless you're, and the only way that could be is that if you had 5,000 in real estate taxes, 5 divided by, what was it, 5,000 divided by 40.4, you were spending $12,500 a year, then 40% of your money is going to real estate or going to housing cost if your mortgage is paid off, because that'd be 40% of your total budget. If 5,000 a year is going to real estate taxes, and you spend 40% of your budget on housing, and you have no other housing costs, and your budget's only $12,500. It's just, I mean, come on, stupid. The point being is, I cannot stress this enough. When you have no mortgage, your housing costs go way down. It's no longer 40% of your expenditures. I don't understand why this is so hard for a lot of people to grasp. They're like, oh my goodness, my inflation rate went up by 8% on my housing. And 40%, look, inflation is 8% in housing, and 40% of my budget is on housing. Thus, my personal inflation rate on housing alone is 3.2%. You're like, but that includes mortgages, man. And now, and even worse, your mortgage didn't go. I'm on an ARM. My mortgage didn't go up, and my ARM adjusted last year. It went from what, friggin' 3.2 or something like that. Was it 3.25, which I had since 2017? I'm still at 5.25 now for the next 5 years. It went up, but my monthly payment didn't. It's just my interest is now higher than what it was. But because I paid so much towards my principal, I'm still looking pretty good, man. I'd like to have this guy paid off in 5 years. One of the reasons I wrote this book on adjustable rate mortgages, by the way, it's okay to get an ARM. People are like, oh, I'll never get an ARM. It'll adjust. It doesn't adjust. I mean, not any ARM I know adjusts yearly. I mean, maybe some do. Anyway, so the point being is, even with my mortgage payment, which represents a significant portion of my overall expenditures, that isn't nearly at all close to 40% of my expenditures. I mean, and my inflation, where did that inflation rate go? I mean, my inflation on my mortgage didn't change. My inflation on my real estate tax did change. It went up a little bit. Relative to my personal inflation rate, it's not nearly as bad. Now, the food is different, I grant you. As I talk about in the book too, when you get older, you don't eat as much. Why? Because you have less people in your household to feed. All right, love your thoughts. Stop the doomsdayers letting you say inflation is going to bankrupt you. It's just not, dude. It's not. You can always have substitution effects. Substitution effect in economics is basic. It's like, man, when that thing goes up, when the price of this TI goes up, I'm not going to buy this TI. I'll buy this one. I guess this is a TI as well. But that's substitution effect. I can't afford this. I'm going to afford this. When the price of ribeye goes up through the roof, I'm not going to buy ribeye anymore. I'll buy flank steak, or I'll buy freaking ground chuck, or I'll buy brisket. Brisket's so good. It's cheap. So that's people aren't stupid, man. This is the issue. Again, the outliers. This is why I can't be on TikTok, by the way. I was talking to Jill last night. I said, I can't be on TikTok. My videos are too long. Remember, the averages skew things towards the outliers, dude. I cannot stress this enough. All right. Don't forget to subscribe down below and the doobly-doo for my email list. Love your thoughts. And don't forget to buy my book. We'll see you guys.